I still had my work lanyard around my neck when I pulled into the driveway and saw the boxes. Not one or two. 6, 7, 8, stacked on the front step like someone was moving out. Except I wasn't moving anywhere. I'd lived in that house for 11 years. My husband, Marcus, was standing on the porch with his arms crossed, wearing the gray hoodie I'd bought him for his birthday 2 Februaries ago. He didn't move when I got out of the car. He just watched me walk up the path the way you watch a delivery person you're waiting to leave. "What is this?" I said. "I think you know." I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. I'd worked a 9-hour shift at the clinic. My feet hurt. I had a half-eaten granola bar in my coat pocket because I hadn't had time for lunch, and I was standing in the freezing Edmonton air in November staring at my own belongings on my own front step. "Marcus, what are you doing? I need you to take your things and go stay with your sister for a while." He said it the way you'd ask someone to move their car out of the driveway, calm, almost bored. "We'll figure out the rest later." I remember looking at the boxes and noticing he'd packed the framed photo of my mother. The one from her garden, the summer before she got sick. He'd taken it off the wall and put it in a box. That was when I noticed the curtain move in the front window. There was someone inside. I'd like to say I screamed. I'd like to say I threw something or demanded answers or did any of the things you imagine yourself doing in a situation like that. Instead, I just stood there in my scrub top and my winter coat, holding my keys, feeling like the ground had done something strange under my feet. "Who is that?" I said. It wasn't even a question. My voice had gone completely flat. Marcus uncrossed his arms. "Her name is Diane. She's been staying here for a few weeks. I should have told you sooner." A few weeks. She had been in my house for a few weeks, and I had been coming home from work and making dinner and watching television and sleeping in my bed, and I had not known. I thought back through October, trying to find the seams, and I couldn't. I'd noticed he'd started doing the laundry himself. I thought he was being helpful. "Marcus." I could hear how quiet my voice was. "That is my house." "Our house," he said. "And, honestly, Claire, things haven't been working for a long time. You know that." I did not know that. I mean, I knew we'd gotten quieter over the years, the way couples do. But I thought that was just what a long marriage looked like from the inside. I thought we were fine. I thought fine was enough. I was 41 years old. I'd been with this man since I was 28. I had spent 13 years building a life I apparently did not have a real claim to, and he was standing there telling me things hadn't been working for a long time, and somewhere inside my house a woman named Diane was watching me through a gap in the curtains. I picked up one of the boxes. I put it back down. "I'm not leaving," I said. His expression shifted. Not angry, exactly. More like annoyed. "Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not leaving my house. We'll get lawyers involved, sort out the mortgage, Marcus." I looked at him. "Whose name is on the deed?" He went quiet. That question had come to me from somewhere I hadn't planned. I don't know why I asked it right then, but I knew the answer, before he said anything, because I remembered sitting in a lawyer's office 11 years ago when we'd bought the place. And I remembered the notary sliding papers toward me first, because the property had been purchased using an inheritance from my grandmother's estate. $43,000. The down payment on a house in Glenora that Marcus had fallen in love with and I had loved because he loved it. My name was on the deed. Only my name. He'd never asked to be added. I'd never thought to ask why. He said, "That's not really the point." "I think it's exactly the point," I said, and I picked up the box with my mother's photo in it and walked back inside my own house. What happened in the next 20 minutes I have gone over so many times that it feels like a film I've seen too often. The details are sharp, but the emotional logic of it still doesn't fully make sense to me. Diane was in the kitchen. She was wearing a cardigan I recognized, a cream wool one I'd left on the coat hook by the back door. And she had a mug in her hand, and she looked at me the way you look at a problem you didn't expect to appear so soon. She was younger than me by maybe 8 or 10 years. She had the kind of careful, composed face that tells you a person has thought about this moment and prepared for it. She didn't flinch when I walked in. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "There hasn't," I said. Marcus had followed me in and was standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, and I remember thinking that he looked like a teenager who'd been caught in a lie, not ashamed, just hoping everyone would calm down so the consequences would be smaller. I put the box on the kitchen counter. I took out my phone, and I called my mother's old lawyer, Andrew, the man who had handled my grandmother's estate, who had been my mother's legal advisor for 30 years, and who had sent me a card when she died and had told me at her funeral to call him if I ever needed anything. I called him at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. He answered on the third ring. I told him where I was standing and what was happening. I kept my voice very level. I got into that mode I sometimes go into at work when a patient is in distress and I need to be the calm person in the room. I detached, just slightly, and I described the situation the way I describe symptoms. He asked me 2 questions. He told me to stay in the house. He said he'd make a call. Marcus was watching me. Who are you calling? Andrew Whitfield. The name landed differently than I expected it to. Marcus knew Andrew. He'd met him twice, once at my mother's estate meeting, once at her memorial. He knew Andrew was a property lawyer. He knew Andrew had handled the deed. Claire, you don't need to. Go wait in the living room, I said. He went. I don't entirely know what Andrew did in the next 40 minutes. What I know is that at 5:15, a woman named Patricia arrived at my front door. She was in her late 50s. She had a leather portfolio under her arm, and she introduced herself as a colleague of Andrew's who specialized in residential property and family law. She shook my hand. She looked at Marcus and she looked at Diane and she set her portfolio on my kitchen table and she opened it. What came out of that conversation I will try to summarize as clearly as I can because the legal parts matter and I want to get them right. The house was mine, had always been mine, registered solely in my name, purchased with funds from a personal inheritance, and at no point had Marcus been added to the title. Under Alberta property law, and specifically under the rules governing matrimonial property in cases where one spouse holds sole title to a residence purchased with pre-relationship assets, the situation was complicated for him. There was more, though. Patricia asked Marcus about the line of credit on the property. He went very still. I didn't know about a line of credit. That was the first I'd heard of it. She showed me the documents, a home equity line of credit taken out 18 months earlier, co-signed, or rather signed, with a version of my signature that was not mine. I had not signed those papers. I had been at a conference in Calgary the weekend. The documents were dated. I had hotel receipts and registration records and a group photo from the workshop that put me 300 kilometers away when my signature had supposedly appeared on a loan application. The line of credit was for $60,000. Most of it had been drawn down. Diane, to her credit, if you can use that word, seemed genuinely surprised. She set down the mug of tea she'd been holding throughout this entire conversation, and she looked at Marcus with an expression I recognized, because I had worn it myself not 2 hours earlier in the driveway. That expression is, I didn't know. She said, Marcus, what did you do? It wasn't a question either. I want to be honest about the part that came after because I think people expect a certain kind of story. The one where everything snaps into place and the villain gets taken away in handcuffs and the woman stands in her doorway watching justice arrive like a weather front. That happened, eventually. But not that night. That night what happened was much quieter and much stranger. Patricia walked Marcus through his legal position in a voice that was so matter-of-fact it was almost kind. Diane called someone on her phone, it was almost kind. A neighbor from down the street, an older man named Gerald who had shoveled my walk without being asked the whole time my mother was sick, knocked on the door around 6 to see if everything was all right, because he'd seen the boxes on the porch and cars he didn't recognize in the driveway. I told him everything was fine. He looked past me at the scene in the kitchen and said, "You sure, Claire?" And I said yes, and he said, "I'm just down the road," and left. Marcus left around 7. He took a bag. He didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. The document Patricia had drafted wasn't an eviction notice technically, but it outlined very clearly what his legal exposure looked like if he remained on the property given the circumstances, and he was not a stupid man. Whatever else he was not stupid. Diane left before him. She took the cardigan off before she went. She left it folded on the kitchen chair. I don't know if that was guilt or just practicality. I've thought about it since. After they were both gone, Patricia sat with me at the kitchen table, and we went through everything. The line of credit, the fraud charge implications, what I would need to do in the coming weeks. She gave me the name of a family lawyer for the divorce. She told me what a civil claim for forged documents looked like. She was there for almost 2 hours, and she charged me nothing for that evening because Andrew had asked her to come as a personal favor. I thought about my mother a lot that night. She had been the one who'd set up my grandmother's inheritance in a separate account before Marcus and I were married. She'd done it carefully and quietly the way she did most things, and when I asked her about it once, she'd said, "It's not that I don't like Marcus, it's that I don't know who either of you will be in 20 years. I thought she was being cynical. I was 29 and in love, and I thought she was being the kind of careful that tips into pessimism. She had been protecting me. She had been protecting me before I knew I needed it. The months that followed were not easy, and I'm not going to pretend they were. Divorce in Alberta takes time, especially when there are financial entanglements being investigated simultaneously. The forged signature on the line of credit became a matter for the RCMP, not just a civil issue, but a potential criminal one. I had to gather records, give statements, sit across a table from someone with a notepad and explain the timeline of my own marriage. There is something surreal about being asked to account for 13 years of a relationship, as though it were a sequence of events rather than a life. Marcus, through his lawyer, initially maintained that I had signed the documents and simply didn't remember. That position did not survive contact with my conference hotel receipt, the time-stamped workshop photos, and the testimony of 4 colleagues who had shared a dinner table with me the evening in question. When that argument collapsed, the story changed. I don't know exactly where it ended up, legally, because at a certain point my lawyer told me that the cleaner I kept my hands from the criminal proceedings, the better, and I took her advice. I filed for divorce in February. By April, the house was legally, unambiguously, solely mine in every way that mattered. The line of credit was a matter of fraud, not joint debt, and while recovering the drawn-down funds would take longer, my liability for them was successfully challenged. Diane, as far as I know, also left Marcus. I heard this through a mutual acquaintance, and I did not seek out more detail. What she did with that information, that the man she'd moved into someone else's house with had also forged documents and drained equity he wasn't entitled to, was her business. I had my own rebuilding to do. What I think about now, almost a year out, is the boxes on the porch. He had packed my mother's photo. He had wrapped it in a tea towel and put it in a cardboard box and stacked it on the step like it was something I should collect on my way out of my own life. I've thought about what that took. Not cruelty exactly, but a specific kind of carelessness towards someone else's grief. My mother had been dead for 14 months when he did that. He had held my hand at her funeral. He had cried, or seemed to. I don't understand him. I've stopped trying. What I do understand is this. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. My mother had it. Patricia had it. Walking into my kitchen with her leather portfolio and her flat, clear voice, I found out that November evening that I had a version of it too. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I picked up a box and walked back into my house and made a phone call. And sometimes that is the whole of what survival looks like. The house is quieter now. I repainted the hallway in January. A warm off-white that's different from the gray Marcus had always liked. Gerald still shovels my walk when the snow is bad, and I started leaving a plate of butter tarts on his porch at Christmas, which he appreciates. I got a cat. She's orange and opinionated, and she sleeps in the exact center of the bed, and I have not once asked her to move. My sister came to stay for 2 weeks in March, and we went through the last of my mother's things, the boxes I'd been putting off, and we talked about her in the way I hadn't let myself talk about her since the funeral. Funny stories. The small, specific things. The way she used to hum while she was doing dishes and never seemed to know she was doing it. We talked about the account she'd kept separate, the careful things she'd done 20 years ago that had, in the end, meant everything. I don't know what I would have done if my name hadn't been on that deed. I've thought about it. I think I would have survived, because you survive things, but it would have been a different kind of surviving. The kind with no floor under you. She gave me a floor. She did it quietly, years before I needed it, without making me feel protected or fragile or watched. She just did it, the way she did most things. And when the moment came, the floor held. I still wear my work lanyard when I pull into the driveway sometimes, and for a moment, just a moment, I see the boxes. And then I park the car and unlock the door and go inside, and the house is warm, and it's mine, and I know exactly where I'm standing. I've thought a lot about the cardigan. Diane folded it before she left, laid it neatly on the kitchen chair, like that small gesture could tidy up what had happened in that room. I've turned it over in my mind so many times, whether it meant something, whether she felt ashamed, whether it was just habit. I still don't have an answer. But I think that's okay. Some things don't resolve into meaning. Some things are just what people do when they don't know what else to do. What I do know is this: Marcus made choices, and those choices had a shape he couldn't see while he was making them. He chose to deceive me, quietly, over months, then all at once on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He chose to forge a signature, to drain equity he hadn't earned, to invite someone else into a life that was built on foundations he hadn't laid. And every one of those choices narrowed the ground under his feet without him realizing it. By the time Patricia opened that folder on my kitchen table, there was almost nothing left for him to stand on. That's not karma in any mystical sense. It's just the way dishonesty works. It borrows against the future. It spends down trust and integrity and care, things that look invisible until suddenly they're gone and the structure collapses. Marcus spent years living in a house that wasn't his, in a marriage he quietly hollowed out, and he thought that was a sustainable arrangement. It wasn't. It never is. What saved me, and I mean this practically, not poetically, was my mother's clarity. She saw, 20 years before I needed her to, that love is real and also that love is not a legal document. She kept my inheritance separate not because she was cold or suspicious, but because she was wise in a way I didn't have the experience yet to appreciate. She understood that protecting someone you love sometimes means doing quiet, careful, unglamorous work that they'll never know about until the moment it matters. That is the kind of intelligence I want to carry forward, not just book sense or professional competence, but the kind of clear-eyed thinking that asks, what does this person actually need, and what can I do now to make sure they have it later? My mother didn't lecture me about finances or warn me about Marcus. She just acted. She thought it through, and she did the thing, and then she let me live my life. And then there's Patricia. I had never met her before she walked through my door. She came because Andrew asked her to, and she stayed for 2 hours, and she charged me nothing, and she was so calm and so precise that the whole terrible evening felt, somehow, navigable. There is a kind of strength in that. The kind that shows up, does the work, and doesn't need the situation to be dramatic to take it seriously. I want to be that kind of person for someone else someday. I want to be the one who answers the call and shows up with a folder. I think about who I was before that November, and I don't blame her. She trusted. She assumed fine was enough. She worked hard and came home and didn't ask too many questions because she was tired and because she loved someone and because that's what you do. There's no shame in that. But I understand now that trust without attention is just hope, and hope is not a plan. The house is mine. The cat sleeps in the middle of the bed. Gerald still shovels the walk. I'm still here.